We're very happy to be sharing the Zoom waves with you this morning. And already it's been an incredible experience for me. So I have to say, I'm not one of those folks who can generally navigate the chat and be present at the same time. And Rose Ingrid just, wow, I had to go out in the chat and send some love about that. That was incredible, incredible. So you're all up and at 'em this morning, so I'm going to launch right in. You can figure out more about me in my bio and go check that stuff out at another point. I'd like to just kind of start to kick this off right away. And I'm going to be really cheeky because it's early in the morning and start with a request of you and a question. So my request is this. I'd like you to think back, go way back there and think of, recall a birthday that you've attended, a birthday party that you were at that was not your own. So I'm going to give you a minute there to go back in your mind castle. Perhaps you do need a little coffee to get that started and figure out a time that you were at a birthday party. Think about that one in your mind. So here's my question now for you. Who told you not to blow out the candles on the birthday kid's cake? How did you know not to do that? That's my question for you. I want to let you sit with that, and then I'm going to start off with the rest of our talk. But who told you that, or how did you know? My co-presenter Christine and I actually thought it was really cool that your theme this month was the spectrum, and that's pretty neat. And I understand from Marwan and Maxine that it's actually something that comes from everywhere. You're all doing this in all your different places, so that's super cool. So I need to let you know something though. Today is actually not going to be a talk exactly about the spectrum or to teach all about the spectrum. I would actually never try to explore, explain the many nuances and the really vast experiences of the autism spectrum in such a short time as we have today. So instead, what I'd really like to do with my time is offer you an idea to think about that relates to accessibility. And one of the elements related to the lived experience of those folks who are on the spectrum. And that's related to social interaction and social communication. Christine as well is going to share, after I've had a chance to chat a bit, she's going to share some lived experience and some of her vast experience from being an advocate as well. So hopefully during this process today, you're going to have some aha moments this morning. That's what we're hopeful of. So we're really just presenting this as an offering to you, something to think about and chew on. For the purposes of today, what I'd really like to ask is that you think about, when we talk about the spectrum, that we think of it as, Christine was using this the other weekend when we were chatting, as the idea of a constellation of stars, as opposed to one linear band, as a spectrum of one linear band where there could be a high end or a low end. I want you to sort of picture in your mind actually instead, when we talk spectrum, as a sort of constellation, a full constellation of stars, to give it more of that sort of 3D effect for you. I've had the privilege of working with folks on the spectrum in my counseling practice for over 20 years now. And it's pretty awesome, actually, I have to tell you. So if you're not someone who has contact or a connection with somebody on the autism spectrum, I highly encourage you to learn more. And although today won't necessarily give you all of that, I know that Christine is probably going to have some resources that she can share. So we'll get you connected that way too, to be able to start to learn more. But one thing from my own experience that I can tell you is that the spectrum is diverse. And I've been saying that for many years because it's been my experience. It encompasses a whole range of lived experiences and intersecting identities. So folks on the spectrum are of all ages, all races, all sorts of cognitive levels. Some may live with their families for all of their lives. Others might live with a partner or a spouse. There are others who live alone. They might be a professor, a cashier, a comedian, an author. They might identify as trans, heterosexual, gender fluid. As one of my very good friends likes to locate on, they mentioned that they locate very strongly in "it's none of your business." all sorts of identities that are occurring on the spectrum as well. They're post-secondary students, grandparents, children, siblings. Some are less verbal than others. Some use assistive technology to communicate. There are some who have mental challenges, mental health concerns, some that are learning to drive, have heartache. There are some who are playing airsoft. There are some who love to game. There are some who will twirl. There are some who struggle, and there's some who thrive, and actually most of both. So I went through that not exhaustive list, just to kind of really drive home that the spectrum is absolutely diverse. And that's one thing I'd like you to know and really feel in your heart to really understand that it's a very, very diverse group of folks. And across the spectrum, I would say that there's a real challenge for finding the really right services and supports out there in our community that are really good fit for them. And as a matter of fact, there are some folks who might have really complex behavioral things going on for them, and they are actually living in a lot of isolation. They and their families can experience a lot of isolation and not have access to the services they actually need. That's one thing you'll probably hear from Christine, and we'll put a note in our information as well too. We're part of a group called the Ottawa Adult Autism Initiative. And that one right now, our initiative is actually doing a community consultation. So we'll send you a link to that particular survey where we're asking all the folks and their allies who are adults in the Ottawa region, what do they need? And we're doing that from the ground up as opposed to deciding for folks what they need. So we'll let you know about that survey as well too. Given that the spectrum is diverse and there's a lot of perspectives, I have a little bit to say about language. So for myself, in my background, in the amount of time that I've been doing this work, I'm definitely that old. I'm feeling it today too. And Rose Ingrid, I'm hearing you on the glasses. I was like, how do I not have those reflect and still be able to read and bring what I want to bring? Can I say to you that I'm so glad you put on those glasses, because what you brought was so awesome. So my background has me fairly steeped in person-first language. So you would hear me say something like a person on the spectrum or a person with autism. But I really want to recognize that out there's a lot of advocates who will refer to themselves as an autistic adult. And I respect that that's the term and the use of language that's really comfortable and preferred for them. So you'll probably see today that we've got all sorts of different terms going on. Another term that I might chat to you about, because you might hear us using it, is the term neurodiversity. So Christine speaks really eloquently about this, and she will probably have a little something to say about it potentially later. But the idea of neurodiversity, think about it as, there's biodiversity, right? So neurodiversity is that sort of diversity of all brains and the way we are wired. And there are some folks who fall into what would be considered neurotypical, and there's some folks who can fall into what is considered neurodivergent within the neurodiversity of brains. So when you hear me saying those words, that's what I'm talking about. So autism is neurodevelopmental in nature, and its impacts are experienced and lived very individually. However, there are actually some common aspects to it and some common threads. Now, as I said, I won't have the time today to go over all of that with you. And do a full review. So I want to actually make note of one of those elements because it's relevant to what I want to offer you as an idea today. So autism can impact and has an impact on the receiving and interpreting and communicating of social information, and it can be quite a challenge. So that's the incoming and the outgoing. Now I want to be really clear and say that that's in no way saying that folks on the spectrum are not social beings. It just means there's a challenge in the receiving of and giving out of that social information. So I want you to think about that for a second. A challenge with social information. Well, to me, like, everything is social. Think about any activity that you might do today, and you can pick a really boring one if you would like, and I'm going to bet that probably it has some social elements to it and some social rules attached to it that you're going to have to navigate. Let's say someone wants to, I don't know, get a prescription from the pharmacy. That requires interaction with folks, navigating things, communicating about what you're needing in a moment. Maybe it's waiting in a crowded space too, depending if you're going out to get it or if you're going online, all of those things. So as you can see, there's definitely some explicit social rules that are at play that we can hear about, and social behavioral rules like, I don't know, please take off your shoes before you enter the house, big sign that says there, or no shirt, no shoes, no service, those types of things. But even if I were to memorize all of those rules that are very explicit and out there and said and written, there's still tons of unwritten social rules out there in our world. So you might want to, at some point in the chat, if you can think of some unwritten rules, then you can put those in too, because I think it might be neat to kind of think about some of those ones. Because when those unwritten rules are broken, whether that's intentional or not, it's not usually much fun. The privilege of falling into the neurotypical category, if you do, is that you have access to all that information, that unwritten information that helps you navigate the world. It's almost like you can soak it up by osmosis. And you don't really have to think about why it is you know it. And even then, I think you'd probably admit that even then navigating the world and the social world out there is not easy regardless, right? So that's why I had you sort of think about the birthday. So think about that birthday again that I asked you to recall, if you don't mind. Now I want you to think about it and imagine it again. And I want you to imagine being there at that party without having the unwritten social information. So perhaps you don't know anything about birthday candles. Imagine yourself seeing the candle on the cake. Now, I don't know about you. I absolutely love candles. I could watch a flame for a very long time. I actually find it very soothing. But I also get an absolute delight out of extinguishing that flame. Right? Like that is super fun. Who does not? Well, there probably are a few people who don't like it, but I'm not in that category. I love to blow out a candle flame. So I want you to imagine yourself doing just that right now. You've gone over and you've blown out the candle. Now imagine that everyone around you is acting negatively towards you, or you think so. You think that's what you're reading. And maybe they're even saying angry words to you. Maybe they're characterizing you as something like mean or selfish or thoughtless or any other adjective. You still don't have any idea why this is happening. And maybe later someone might explain it. And the explanation leaves you as the person who's done wrong. You have broken a social convention, crossed an unwritten rule. It hurts. You feel potentially shame about that or confusion. You would like to repair, but the time is done now as well. So now here's the crux of my actual talk for you today. I did all of that to give you a little bit of context so I could bring you forth the idea that I would really, really like you to chew on. What if? What if at that birthday party, there was a chance given to each child to blow out the candle? Or the child came around with a cupcake for every other child with a candle in it, and that could be blown out. That there was a candle in the middle of the table and children came over, and as they blew out the candle, they stated a wish for the child. For those who want to keep something very unique for the birthday child, after all this candle blowing going out, they could stand up on a chair and try and blow out their own candles from above. Anything different. So you see these small little tweaks switch up the situation. And each person in that situation gets to actively engage in a different way. To make, now, of course, I'm thinking about in the time of COVID, maybe this doesn't work so well, right? We're not all about blowing out candles right now. However, when you think about COVID, COVID is right now giving a lot of people who are neurotypical the chance to see what it's like to not know what the social rules are right now, the unwritten ones. Where do I stand? How close do I stand? How comfortable is this person with me being this close or that close? Do they have something going on that I'm not sure about? How do I go into a grocery store now? What do I do in an elevator? Oh my gosh, do I use an elevator? Well, I don't know, right? That feeling of having to navigate that they perhaps haven't had to do before because it was already coming in, that information was already coming in for them. So actually it gives quite a unique opportunity for people to think about it. So in my what if questions, I'm asking that because I'm not actually saying that social norms are a bad thing. We have social contracts for a lot of reasons and unwritten things for a lot of reasons. But I would like to start to challenge ourselves to really start to break open the spaces that potentially are guarding some of those social norms for a particular reason. So the reaction that people might have had in that birthday party to feeling discomfort when that unwritten social norm was breached is something that we have the opportunity to work on creatively. When that reaction is defensive and accusatory from the neurotypical point of view, I suggest that it wouldn't actually be that hard for us to shift our mindset just a little bit and access our own creativity on how to crack open the space so that it's more accessible. And so that the person who has broken that doesn't have to be left feeling bad or faulty. We can be leveraging our own creativity to have responses that really create new opportunities for us to connect and send a message out in the world that the world is actually a place that is open to a complete neurodiversity of people. And I would say that co-creating those spaces and those moments that are accessible to a true neurodiversity of lived experience is actually really an amazing opportunity for everyone. The opportunity that, you know, when you get asked something by someone potentially who's on the spectrum, will say, why are you doing it that way? Or they're thinking outside the box and it makes you go, huh. That's an opportunity. That's a fantastic moment where we get kicked out of our own cruise control, and we actually have to think about and communicate why it is that we do the things that we do. And it gives us a chance to contemplate, to question, to potentially challenge ourselves and the social interactions and assumptions that we're making. So it really presents us with an opportunity to fully engage in our own social lives. So my passion is pushing settings and spaces and services to creatively engage with folks on the spectrum, because I think it's too often that folks on the spectrum are being asked to devote so much of their time and their energy into having to navigate the world when we really could be at least meeting halfway, right? What happens if in that birthday, never mind, even we don't even have to switch things up that much. We could simply be letting someone know what's going on. Hey, it's Tara's birthday. We're now about to sing. We're going to bring out a cake. Tara gets to blow out the candles first. Anyone else want to blow out some candles? There's one on the table. That's how we're going to do that. So when you think about that, that's not just good for the person on the spectrum. Think about someone who might have a visual impairment and might want to hear a description of what's about to happen and going on. Think about someone who might have a bit of anxiety and it's just really comforting to know what's about to happen, right? To be able to be assured that there's not going to be 1,000 popping balloons happening right now. Think about anyone who's not used to the situation of a birthday party and wants to really get a sense of feeling included. That's helpful for everyone and really breaks open that accessibility space. So often it just takes a small tweak. So I'm, like, for instance, in my counseling practice, I made the effort to learn about manga because I had a client who was, I realized, explaining how they were feeling by which manga they were talking about. And I'm pretty geeky. I know a lot of quirky, geeky things. I'm into a lot of stuff. And so, you know, had that person been talking about a certain level of wizard in D&D, I would have known right away. But manga, I didn't know. And so what I did is I went and researched it and I learned about it. So I knew what Fruits Basket meant and I knew what talking about bleach meant. Right? And so that's an example of how services can start to really use their own creativity to connect and make it fit. Understanding that there's sensory issues for folks. Do we always have to have people in crowded waiting rooms, or are there mechanisms we can use to have someone still be waiting in line and come in at a time that's comfortable for them? Of course there is. It's not such a big deal. And so while I'm not saying let's break down every unwritten social rule, because yep, they're there for a reason, let's think about which ones we're guarding and why and what privilege we're accessing when we do that. Thinking about those unwritten social rules in your environment is maybe a challenge I give to you today. How could you communicate them, reveal them in a way that kind of lets everyone in your midst know about them? I'm pretty sure you can really, that's a cool challenge for yourselves around your own creativity, how you can start to crack open those spaces. So I think I'll leave it at that for now. My colleague's going to present on her lived experience as well too. And we agreed previous to this that I might ask her a few questions, and she's got lots to say as well. And then at the end, we want to leave some time for questions. And I know that Maxine and Marwan are going to look to that for you too. So that's what I wanted you to sort of chew on today. I offer that to you. And I look forward to hearing even in the chat what ideas you might have even in your own lives right now, whether you provide a service or just in your own social environment, what you might be able to do to activate this for yourselves today. So I'm going to invite Christine to join us as well too.
Good morning, everyone, and I want to thank Rose, Ingrid, and Tara for their wonderful contributions today, and just remind you about neurodiversity again. I like to explain it as biodiversity means among animals and plants and nature, and the diversity of human diversity of all races, for example, all nations, and then the diversity of all brains being neurodiversity. So maybe you don't imagine this older woman fits on the autistic spectrum at all. I often get told, you don't look autistic. So I'm about to turn the prism on its head, as our September spectrum theme states. You may not have met an autistic woman before, but now you're meeting me. My talk will include a little bit of show and tell, and you will find a list of resources from Maxine and Marwan, our great Ottawa hosts this morning. Today I'm speaking just for myself, not necessarily all autistics or even all autistic women. I could call this How to Save a Perfectly Good Female Life. That's the subtitle of one of my friend's books, Leanne Holiday-Willie. All my life I searched for wholeness and beauty in the world. My friend Teresa wrote this yesterday. I had to throw together a meme about it, but you'll see it someday. Search for beauty, make the beauty, share the beauty. That's what my life's been about. I never found it though. I never fit in. I tried so many therapists and self-help books. No one ever suggested autism. After I tried on and worn many masks and many labels, I found out by accident I'm actually autistic. I dealt with a lot of regret. What if I had a son or a nephew or maybe even a grandson? It's usually boys who get diagnosed, or at least they do younger. Would I have known a lot sooner than age 48? Music and masking, those are my big themes today. Music is my first love, it will be my last, sang John Miles. One clever therapist used my music choices during sessions to help me label my emotions. I had a cassette tape back then, and we would cue up the various songs depending on how I was feeling, and they expressed my feelings for me. That therapist listened and learned the right thing to do. Music was my ticket into society. Masking my true self became the prescription to pass unnoticed or indistinguishably from other people. So how did I use my creativity to make sense of life? Well, I sang before I spoke. Music's my native language, my way of connecting to the world. I taught myself to read and play the piano, and I dug up a picture of me and my godmother. I think I'm about 2 here, so here I am. And I didn't plunk away. You know, some kids just bang the piano. No, I was trying to play. So, you know, twinkle, twinkle, things like that to start. But I didn't get any lessons till I was a lot older. They couldn't afford them. What got in the way of my creativity? Well, that social minefield that Tara was just describing. It got harder and harder to navigate as I went through school. So music became my form of self-soothing. And if you look up vocal stimming or verbal stimming, you'll find videos and examples of people who use music as a form of self-soothing. So I lacked the antenna for social cues. Everything was a mental exercise, like the rules to games, taking turns, not butting in and interrupting. Then I had extreme empathy. There's this myth, this stereotype we have to bust that autistics don't have empathy. There are a few, but most of us are overly sensitive, so we shut down. I was sensitive mostly to the pain of animals, and I had to be near the water. I loved being in the water. So you'll have kids that actually drown because they're drawn so much to water. That's a danger, obviously. I'm going to signal boost just for a second. A wonderful book he wrote it at 14 and 15. This was just given the Wainwright Prize. A lovely Irishman, Dara McAnulty, just published this Diary of a Young Naturalist. He is trying to save the earth, and so are a lot of 15-year-olds right now. This is his plea for the environment. There's a poem called Anthropocene, if you can find that on YouTube. He presented it, I think it was to the Mayor of London, England. So it's amazing what he's doing. And I want to give a shout out to these young people that are making a change, like Greta Thunberg, who is openly autistic as well. So when I look back on my high school years, though, I didn't succeed socially. I was very often shunned and alone. I used to hide out in the drama classroom where there was an old piano, and I took turns playing piano with an older student. He played Pink Floyd, and I love the Dark Side of the Moon cover, by the way, you know, the prism, right? The light shooting in all directions. That's how I see the autism spectrum, is that rainbow of light in 3 dimensions. I would play Elton John and the Beatles, and I don't know, was that mystery boy autistic too? I never even knew his name. After school, I spent time sort of de-stressing with my one girlfriend and my piano at home, and that prevented what we call the 4 o'clock explosion. So there are girls that are goody-goody all day, high academic achievers, and their parents say, but you don't see my girl at home. She just loses it. It explodes all over the place. So you may be holding it together for reasons of not being judged, and then at home you just let it all out. Remember Burton Cummings and Stand Tall? Sometimes late at night when there's nothing here except my old piano? Or Jackson Browne, be sure you've got it all set to go before you come for my piano? That's me. Those are absolutely me. I was a chameleon. I didn't know I was autistic, so I tried on various personas, many different jobs, mostly unpaid. I think I stopped counting at 40 jobs that I've had. These masks I wore were out of desperation to fit in, not to mislead anyone. So I was just trying to survive. Now at 60, I feel I'm safer to unmask, and I'm less of an imposter because I'm discovering my true self. You know the saying, necessity is the mother of invention? Well, from that I got my nickname, the mother of reinvention. So in high school, no one suggested a music career. I was too shy. Everybody thought performer, right? Like our wonderful guest today. No one ever suggested I could teach music or write about music, which both things that I do now. Journalism was my second choice, so I scraped through at Carleton, getting my Bachelor of Journalism, and I never pursued a master's. I've often thought I should have stayed in academia. Instead of the daily grind of the newsroom, the noise, the artificial lighting, strangers every day that you have to interact with. But my volunteer radio career at CKCU suited me fine. It lasted over 20 years, and I still go back for reunions. Then I drifted into a career as a safety advocate. I found out that I enjoyed teaching in small groups if it was a subject I was really interested in. I wrote, I published a small newspaper, I traveled to give lectures on cycling. These were carefully scripted, just as today's is, and I became an authority on my passion. That lasted 7 years, my longest job. But I lost that one, just as I had many others. I couldn't tell when I was being forced out. So I worked part-time into my 30s, upgraded my skills to teach singing and later piano. Eventually, I knew self-employment as a music teacher was the only way forward. Some studies say only 16% of autistic adults are employed. But they mean full-time. I mean, how many non-autistic creative people are employed full-time? I don't think that's a fair standard. It's highly unfair.
You and I were talking, and we thought we'd ask you a couple of questions. So you've kind of gone through what music has meant for you, and I think we can hear that that's been super important for you. What's been you've talked a little bit about masking, so you might want to talk a little bit more about that. I know that one of the passions that you have is to look at how to support and connect out with other women on the spectrum. So why don't you talk a little bit about just that and what that's meant for you? Because when you talk about reinvention or invention of yourself and using your own creativity, yes, you do that certainly in your work life, but also you really use that passion to connect out and let other women know things or connect with them. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
I would think that women who are undiagnosed are some of the bravest people I've ever met because they don't know how brave they're being. They haven't a clue. And the masks that we wear, I find they're the prescription to get by in the world. But at what cost? I'm seeing PTSD in my support groups. I'm seeing trauma, depression, and it's just like peeling back the layers. If anybody knows Jane Siberry, yeah, she's a beautiful song. And, we're trying to get down the layers of the onion to get to the true self. And the suicide rates among autistic women are 9 times that of the population. So it's really scary. And if I can help one woman find her true calling, her true self, then I think it's worth it.
So Christine, I'll ask you another question. Just around, so we've been talking about sort of how both folks on the spectrum have to use their own creativity and energy to navigate the world. And I was bringing up that sort of notion of, how can we ask people to creatively engage and leverage their own creativity to create more accessible spaces. I'd like to ask you a question about how do you, what for you would be an example of meeting someone halfway? What would be, from your perspective, I realize too, we've been really careful to say we're not trying to represent everybody's perspectives here, right? But just from you, from Christine, what's an example of being met halfway?
I would say being believed is the big thing. I think women, especially women who self-diagnose, are really attacked right now. And people don't know how hard it is to get a correct diagnosis after so many misdiagnoses or just flying under the radar. So if someone would just believe us for a change, that would be part of the way, halfway. Accepting that our presentation might be different than the stereotype they have of an autistic boy or young man, which is still diagnosed, 3 to 4 times as often as in women. So, and the other way that I reached out was through our wonderful book, which is in the resource list. I wrote a chapter in here, and it's been a real journey of exploration of the female presentation. I won't say it's female autism because some men actually enjoy the book too and found a relationship with us through this publication. Also, I did the movie screening with you last fall. We did Seeing the Unseen, which is on our list of resources. So you can check this film from Iceland, which I helped bring to Canada, because I saw those women's experiences and I right away resonated with them. And interestingly, there were 17 of them and there were 17 in our book. So a little ironic coincidence there.
So one last question to wrap up then potentially, and certainly Maxine and Marwan can tell us about timing and whether we need to give some more space for questions. But so you and I met we've met in a couple different arenas and areas, and one of them being the Ottawa Adult Autism Initiative. And you've done a fantastic job today of bringing sort of that perspective of, like certainly in my practice, I see a lot of women, I see a lot of folks who are older, as well as youth and adults. And so that perspective has been shown there today. But the Adult Autism Initiative is kind of doing a reach out right now to all autistic adults. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how, again, to give the audience today a chance to sort of think about, okay, so how could we do more to use our own creativity to connect with a whole variety of different folks. So whether that be someone who is younger, a teen who's kind of just maybe had a diagnosis or has had a diagnosis since they were very young, or it could be someone who's out in a rural part of our community who doesn't have a lot of access to resources and is struggling with some things as well too. Also within our different communities, finding that sort of social acceptance within their own community as well. All of that comes to play. So my question to you, so we can wrap up, is what would you suggest folks in our audience could do to kind of respond to that very wide variety of people who are out there in our community who are on the spectrum?
If you think outside the box, you've got somebody who's neurodivergent in one of your committees or work groups or whatever, let them express those radical ideas. And I know we've never done it this way before, but sometimes those marginalized voices are not being heard, whether it's racialized discourse or not. And I do find with our survey, I hope we can find these marginalized women who don't speak English as their prime language, or maybe they're too poor to afford a diagnosis. They need their voices heard. And maybe you know someone out there who doesn't fit the model of being socially typical, or you yourself are wondering. After all, we're 1% of the population, and people forget that. Autistics are, I mean, they don't just disappear when they turn 21. So if there's 1% of children, then there's got to be at least 1% of the adults as well. And they just weren't seen. When we were younger, there was no word for this. There was a very severe form, and then we had the spectrum developed more in the 1990s that came into the forefront. So if I can bust these stereotypes and help women find their identities, then I'll be content. And awesome. I put a link to Autism Level Up, which is a place to start if you're trying to go from awareness to appreciation, and maybe from appreciation even onward from there. So my friends in Rhode Island.
Awesome. Great, Christine, thank you. So I'll just take a second to wrap up, and then I think we can have some questions certainly too, if people are putting things in the chat. Nice. So I think just to leave people with the idea, some of those core concepts that we put out there today, that the spectrum absolutely is diverse, and there's all sorts of intersecting identities that are out there, that you yourselves, whether you're on the spectrum or you're not, can be using your creativity and leveraging that to really break open spaces and create more accessibility. And we see even through the chat that matters to people of all sorts, to have that access. So we know that that's important for everybody. So, and then, you know, that idea of really hearing and listening to people's lived experience about how their own creativity has been both a healing, a coping strategy, and a gift out back into the world. And I think that's a really important thing to remember when we're talking about sort of that neurodiversity of wiring, that everybody's contributing in this way. And so that it's very important that we pay attention to that and create spaces for that. So I think that will be our wrap up for today. It's not everything about the spectrum. The spectrum is super cool, let me say. I continue to learn. I continue to get all sorts of good stuff from my interactions with, again, a whole neurodiversity of folks. So we'll leave it open to questions, and we'll certainly add some resources in. I might add some, Marwan, you could maybe send out some links that are to the Algonquin College videos that a lot of folks on the spectrum, students on the spectrum there did. And now I'm going to mute myself because the recycling's being picked up now.
I'm just looking for some advice or some tips, maybe in the chat, on how to make online events, online meetings more accessible for neurodivergent individuals.
I can give a quick little response to that, and I'm sure there's lots of people in the chat who could also put some tips and hints in there. That's actually obviously a big thing that's come up now as we've made this shift based on COVID to more online things, but this was already something that the accessibility community was really looking at. So in some ways, sometimes this interaction actually is helpful because we have signifiers that are showing claps and all of those things. So for instance, someone who might have a sensory challenge in a bigger environment, we will sometimes shift to doing this as a quieter way to say for clapping, if there's a lot of folks who are finding it challenging to have the noise of a lot of people clapping. So when you look at a Zoom environment, or, you know, I don't want to just promote Zoom, any kind of digital platform environment, you have some recognizers or some visual things. Now that's not always fully accessible either, because you have to know which things to pay attention to. It's not great necessarily for other folks. So there's always sort of that balance of finding what's going to be accessible. I would say a first ground rule, though, for any kind of accessibility for people would be to really give some advanced organizing information. So even Marwan went through with you today, what's expected, what's going to be the general, what are the rules we're dealing with here today? How are we going to do things? That in itself really supports anyone who has having increased anxiety or is not sure what's going to happen. That just as a base level. But there are definitely, in my work I'm doing at Carleton through READ, which is called Research, Education, Accessibility, and Design, we're definitely doing some looking at what are some ways that we can have these digital environments be a bit more accessible for everyone.
And also, don't expect people to stay on screen. I can't keep staring at eyeballs. I have to get up and walk around. So I've got my audio on, but I'll frequently be off camera. So this is unusual for me to sit still this long. Okay, I got to stim, I got to move. So be patient with people that have physical requirements in order to attend your Zoom meetings.
Also for kids, like the school boards need to be able to teach people how to use these platforms. For instance, when we were in classrooms, we're not used to looking at all of our peers while we're learning, right? So just even teaching people not to be on gallery view when they're wanting to try and focus on what a speaker is saying. You know, sometimes if you're not super tech savvy or haven't used this, then you need to know to do that. So those things are really helpful for any kind of executive functionings and focusing, all of that piece. So giving not just the etiquette of Zoom or digital interaction, but also what you can do to play with it so that it actually suits your learning style and your processing style as well. Christine, I loved that comment. That's very akin to the look me in the eyes kind of thing, right? Like, does your camera have to be on? And it's true, sometimes being transparent about it. As a presenter, I love seeing people. It was really hard today. When I get to speak in person, I get to get the energy off of people. I can see the person nodding. I can connect with someone. I can move around. In this environment, I can't. I'm not getting the same feedback. So it's hard when people aren't on camera. But if I just say that's why I would like you to be on, you then have you're a lot more empowered to choose when you're going to be there and when you're not. And we've now had a conversation where you're saying, I'm not going to be you're not going to see me the whole time. So you can deal with that, Tara. And I'm going to say, yeah, and I'd love you to be there for just even a minute so I can connect with you. That's the conversation we want to start having.
In these times when kids are all having to take classes via Zoom, I have a friend who's really struggling because the rules of sit still and pretend to be neurotypical in front of the camera at all times for 8 hours a day on video at school are driving her son fairly crazy. And I think because the whole online culture is alien to the teachers, they don't know how to deal with people who they knew how to at least accept in the classroom, in the virtual classroom. And so people keep getting in trouble for doing things like figuring out how to change the rules to enjoy the system. I guess her son figured out he could take a picture of himself and use it as a Zoom background and leave. Which I think is absolutely brilliant and should be rewarded, but somehow the teacher was underwhelmed by it. So my question, I just saw So Creative pop by. My question is, do there already exist somewhere some rules of the road for educators in this new online world to help their students cope, their neurodiverse students cope, and help the teachers learn better ways to expect or cope themselves with people who just can't deal with, like Christine said, with staring at people for 8 hours a day and sitting still and all these things that are such an awful challenge.
So this is something that I've been in a lot of conversations about. In my past, I was a teacher, and I have a lot of educator friends as well too. And so I think certainly this time right now is very bumpy as everyone's just trying to figure out what it means to be in this new practice. And I would say that teachers also probably haven't had enough time yet to figure it out for themselves either. So a quick answer to your question is, I'm not aware of a resource yet. I, as a parent, having some kids in the school boards as well, one who is, yeah, so, you know, there's a lot going on for the kids, right? And but my kids are both in high school at this point. The young ones is a whole different story. I did a survey, and I suggested highly that just what I'd said to you earlier, which is they need to be able to provide some guidelines both to students and to teachers on how to work with this. Certainly, though, any student who might potentially have an individualized education plan could be reaching out to say, this is what we're going to use this plan for this year. Like, those are living, breathing documents. They're not just a document that says at one point this child will get extra time on tests. Like, they move with what the experience is. So that would be
trying to work with the lag, the time lag for music teaching, because I've lost most of my neurodivergent students because they can't take music lessons with me online. They just can't. So my business is really down.
Yeah, I think, and I saw Erica's a teacher, but it seems like one concern is the requiring gallery view, and they don't want the students to be a distraction for the other students. So the normal coping mechanism that you'd have of walking around, they're going to forbid, and they don't want you to turn your video feed off because then they no longer have control over whether you're there or not. So yeah, a set of rules and ideas for everybody to cope in these situations would be awesome. And I hope when somebody from here volunteers to do that, they send me the link.